Techy, where we're going to be talking about what are we going to talk about? Conferences, and we just spent a lot of time talking about analysts at conferences and the role of analysts as spokespeople and kind of general prognosticators. And we almost recorded the entire podcast before getting to the podcast. And I do think we should bring the producer on this at some point. But we're going to do it for live and for real now. So I'm VP of Research, John Collins.
And I'm CTO, Howard Holton.
One day, Howard.
No,
we'll skip to the script.
I like it. I like it. So just in case anyone's not aware, this is not a scripted show.
No shit.
Just in case people were like, "Wow, that's a weird direction for that to go." We don't have cards. We don't have a script. We ideate right before we record. And much like another podcast that I do, The Sweet Spot, it sometimes feels like the topics that we chose are based off how much we rant before we start recording. Like if we can get into a good rant, we're like, "Oh, well, that's interesting enough to record." And so if anyone's wondering, that's why our intros are always, we'll say slightly different each episode.
I do remember once I was doing a podcast with my son actually about, it was called Tech-Splaining, which we kind of bagged and then someone else used it, which was quite a cool name. But we were talking about autonomous cars. And the rabbit hole we went down was autonomous cars would be really great to bring you back from the nightclubs at night when you're younger and so on. But no one wants to be in the third time that's taken someone home bathing and etc. Just the state that those cars are going to end up in every Saturday night. You can't script this stuff. Sometimes no. You just can't. You just can't.
No, but if you think about it, an autonomous car, you no longer have to have a driver compartment, right? Not at all, right? And so why not make it out of material that can just be hosed out, right? Dual sliding doors, right? The doors just slide out of the way. You hit it with a hose. Right, like.
But do you have those toilets in the US which literally give themselves a wash down after someone's used it? Well, just do that.
Sorry, we're talking about cars, and all of a sudden it switches to toilets, and I get a little.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I don't want to drive in a toilet.
Well, no, but I'm sure the same technology in multiple ways could be reused. But
I mean, you use UV light too, right? Like you could. There's probably a bunch of stuff you could do if you purpose designed a car, right? So kind of flush it. Hit it with there's no passengers, right? And so you can hit it with UV light, which is not good for human skin, but really good at killing other germs, right? So probably use water sensors and stuff to see how deep you need to clean and like, because you have to assume, like, if you're gonna you want to maximize the number of rides. This is not at all the topic we set to talk about.
This is absolutely not. But interestingly, it is. I'm still waiting because, in principle, with electric vehicles, we don't have to stick to the form factor, and thus far, we're largely sticking to the form factor. And I can't wait for these non-conventional form factors to start emerging.
We have to stick to the form factor a bit, right? Like the width of roads probably needs to be maintained.
For sure. You know what I mean?
There's a length requirement because you have to make right and left turns.
I've got a pod thing in my head. We just want to kind of have little pods, and then they can all link together, and then we can all happily drive, use one engine to take us down the freeways together.
Well, even if you didn't use one engine, you could still use multiple engines, but you'd slipstream effectively.
Yeah, absolutely, and just wiggle along like a snake, and then one peels off, and the other two, with a magnetic coupling. Anyway, that is not
where I think that actually becomes interesting is reserving lanes for that very thing. I always thought there should be, rather than carpool lanes, you should have high speed rail lanes everywhere, like
high speed pod lanes. Absolutely.
But if you get into autonomous vehicles, throw the carpool lane completely away. It becomes the autonomous vehicle lane, because you need to get to a point where the lane is protected, so you can have this much or zero distance between you and the car in front of you, right? And the computer can manage that, but human beings don't react fast enough. Right.
Absolutely. Anyway. Yeah. Which is not at all the topic.
Not at all.
The topic we're here to talk about, and you're going to kick it off, Howard, is being an analyst at conferences.
Yeah, and kind of what analysts do and what the value of an analyst at a conference is. And I think people have heard me, to be really clear, we are both analysts. right? My title is CTO and lead analyst. Like, I'm still an analyst. I work for an analyst organization. I go to conferences. I speak and write about what I've seen, what I've heard, and what I think. The think, I think, is the part I find valuable. But I also have kind of a dim view of analysts in general. I always have, which comes from kind of 35 years being in the field and being on the customer side and accepting not being an analyst, right? Accepting the results, right? Just like, you know, I owned a restaurant for a little while, and oftentimes you read a review of a restaurant, you're like, oh, this person's never worked in a restaurant before, right? Like, okay, you've graded the plate, but you have no concept of how that thing came together or why that thing came together, right? I had the same complaint about Siskel and Ebert, professional film reviewers, right? Because a lot of the films I think many of us love have horrible reviews, right, by the critics, the analysts, and I think oftentimes they missed the point, and I kind of have the same concern about analysts. So so that makes it sound weird that I came to work for an analyst organization, but effectively, I feel the best way to fix something is to get into the system and start working to fix it.
Yeah, I tried that once.
Yeah,
it didn't go well, but I'm still an analyst.
So I got invited to an event last year, and it was the first event that I really went to as an analyst that had like an analyst track to it. There were a few where I got tickets, but they didn't really have an analyst track, so I was just another attendee. In this one, they're like, they put all the things on my calendar that were the analyst only events, and so I started showing up to them. And I'm in one, and it's the future of cloud in 10 years, and they've got 4 panelists to talk about it. And the whole audience is just analysts, and it's DevOps team leader, DevOps practitioner, DevOps team leader, and the founder of a DevOps focused company that had like 4 employees and no one had ever heard of before. Right. And I'm listening to everything they're saying, and I'm not disagreeing with anything in principle. Right. But there's a lack of scale in the totality of the conversation. Right. This is what cloud's going to be like in 10 years. And it's effectively the same thing they told us 10 years ago when DevOps was first kind of crawling out of the ideation phase into the professionalism phase. Right. Everyone's going to do infrastructure as code. This is just the way the world's going to work. Every team will be a DevOps team, kind of all this stuff. And I'm listening to it, and I'm not writing anything down, because I haven't heard one thing that first is new and original, and second is reasonable. And you know, my peers, all the other professional analysts, are asking questions, and I'm just like, this is the first one of these I've been in. I don't know what the hell the job is yet. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But there's a big gaping hole in the questions, right?
And can I just throw in? Yeah. Let's make one thing clear, or let's remove the elephant from the room. Let's very quickly haul it out the window, which is, it could just be that you're boring. So, sure. But I'm going to say, given the fact that you spend a lot of your time on Reddit, you spend a lot of your time kind of hanging around with hackers and, you know, learning things and so on and so forth, we can remove that risk a little,
right? I'm less a talking head than it initially seems, right? Not you can actually kind of see my rack right here that I'm working on, and right in front of that is for those who know what it is, it's a Dell Vertex blade system, and you know, so I still got my hands dirty, but that's not the point, right? There was always this, like, all the questions that get asked and the conversation keeps going, and there's this big like gray area that I don't know if everybody's staying away from or if they don't know to ask the question or nothing. And finally I raised my hand and I went, this is ridiculous. This is the same story we got 10 years ago. Do you know why this hasn't happened yet? And everybody stares at me, and I'm like, you don't have a single leader up on stage. 10 years ago, the average age of my IT employee was still 40. Today it's 45. These are not people that are comfortable going from a GUI where it's next finish to the command line and having to think about these things programmatically. That's not been the job. And you're not taking someone who's most of the way through their career and changing hearts and minds. Right? This stuff isn't easy to do. It's got a high level of fragility. Were you to have one executive leader on up there that ran a team of 1,000, right, that was responsible for a large piece of the organization, you'd get a completely different story. And the story would be, we'd be happy to change, but the stuff doesn't have a bridge to go from where my people are today to where we'd say we want them to be. It's the same problem we had a decade ago. And in 10 years of looking at this and seeing DevOps teams be marginalized and see companies go through version 2, version 3, version 4, version 5 of their cloud strategy and continue to fail at it, and continue to see articles published where our expected cloud spend for fiscal year whatever will exceed our global revenue for fiscal year whatever, right? Nothing has changed from the very people creating the tools. And the fact is, until that changes, nothing's going to change. So I got really frustrated. I'm like, you're not, like, this goes back to the people who put on the panel. You're not giving us a complete picture of those involved in this process to then have the lofty goal to try to tell me what cloud's going to be like in 10 years. And I'm ashamed that the rest of you didn't ask the question. Like, I'm new to this business. I figured some of you would go, there's not a leader up here. Doesn't that mean there's something missing?
So that's a big brush to tar all analysts with. So how do we get to kind of, let's coat that brush and slap it around a bit?
It's a very unfair brush to use, without a doubt, right? I was frustrated in the room. However, it doesn't change that as an analyst, you can't report on what's not in the room other than to say it's not in the room. And if you don't have the experience, like if your job as a professional analyst, in the same way if your job is a professional engineer or if your job is a professional pastry chef, you can't talk in depth about things to which you have no experience, right? And so that's kind of where I think I want to talk.
Okay, so my task on this particular podcast is to defend the indefensible. So that was the good, the bad, and the techie, and thank you for it. But I think rather than it being about kind of a binary, well, therefore it doesn't work or whatever, it goes right to the heart of what doesn't work. And then that's worth picking apart. So is there still validity if they can't even answer the basic question of what does tech cloud look like in 10 years' time in a way that actually reflects reality? So I think that the trouble with analysts, if I may, and I heard this from an analyst relations person. They said, "Oh, so and so firm had a good analyst. They came from industry. They knew what they were talking about. But after 4 or 5 years of just theorizing and talking to other people about their experiences, they just kind of their edge started to dim. They lost their ability to reflect what reality did look like, and I think we've seen this again. The best analysts I know are the ones that either never left industry, if you like. They might act as analysts, but actually, I can think of a few that I've worked with in the past. They're literally saying the same stuff that they said 20 years ago, and fantastically, it's still got validity because it's got a lot more validity, even though it needs updating from time to time, than the lack of reality that comes with not doing that. And then the other sort, which is the sort that we have at GigaOm, is the ones that are constantly testing their skills and sharpening that blade. Even when I stepped out and was CTO for 18 months, it doesn't take long to kind of go, oh yeah, crap, I remember. There's the real world, and none of that airy fairy stuff's going to work. So I mean, do you think you just had a bad experience, or is that what you've seen again and again?
Well, that's what I got as a customer, right? As a customer of analyst work, what I got was an incomplete picture. Right? I needed the full circle, not Pac-Man, right, with a big mouth open, because, and again, this isn't restricted to what we do, but it is kind of, but it is problematic. Okay, cool. You've told me this thing, but you haven't actually told me how to implement it. You haven't actually told me what the team should look like. Like what you've described doesn't fit the operating model. I don't have a role that does that. Or it's 4 different people that now somehow, in order to do what you're telling me, have to change the way they fundamentally communicate, right? Or 4 different teams have to fundamentally change the way they communicate. And while that's nice on paper, that's not a small feat. There's 1,000 people that work on these, within this organization. And so shifting an operating model or adding a different operating workflow is big work, right? It's like you've missed the fact that there's an organization, and thus there's organizational change control that has to occur here. And you treat this as though these are light switch situations, and then chide us for not all doing it without understanding the context of how we got to where we are, why we operate the way we do, and what we need to then do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you also never do a good job of telling me what good looks like.
I think that if I was to jump to at least part of the answer, if we're talking about vendor conferences, there's, I guess there's 3 types of conference. There's the CNCF stuff, so kind of conferences of interest, if you like. Okay. Then you've got the kind of the InfoSec kind of RSA type things, which overlap with that, but they tend to be more kind of programmed around a theme. And then you've got the vendor, the AWS reInvent or whatever.
Sure.
So within that, I've had probably bad experiences at least 2 of those. So it's not necessarily reflecting the different conference styles. But I think anyone organizing a conference and anyone organizing an analyst track at a conference, and anyone getting analysts together with anybody at a conference, if it is true, and it's certainly true from my perspective, that end user experience goes a hell of a long way, it would be to move that end user experience front and center of what the conference is about. And a recent example that went relatively well was AWS ran a European event, and they got some of their customers along. And I think that we shouldn't sit through the AWS, in this case, strategy for half a day and then get a customer. We should sit through customers for half a day and then get half an hour of AWS strategy, because the customers are telling, these are the problems we're trying to solve today. And people go, oh, wait, I thought you had that one fixed, which is the big problem analysts I've seen happen again and again. Everyone thinks cloud's done, for example. Sure. Everyone thinks
about cloud, because we've been talking about it for 10 years and it's done.
Yeah. DevOps should be finished by now, right? Haven't we already moved on? And the answer is no, because some companies are barely off the starting blocks, and there's reasons for that, which is the problem that they were trying to solve was different to the problem the cloud providers were trying to solve for, or it's just harder than that, or they did it once and then it didn't work and they had to do it again, or whatever. So getting the end users in the room early and giving analysts the slap they need, I think it's a way
getting the right end users in the room, right? Like if you're just going to put someone up where it's all roses and sunshine, I have no interest in it and I'm going to leave. I would rather sit by the pool or go have a Starbucks, right? Because you don't learn from success the way you learn from failure, right? Ooh, I'd like to be that successful is way different than, ooh, I don't want to make that mistake. Thank you for telling me. You know what I mean? One is the pie in the sky, and we all know it's fake. We all know it's BS to some degree, right? Sure, you're very happy. You got exactly what you wanted out of it. It went as smooth as any 24-month project goes, but no 24-month project has 0 changes, has 0 missed timelines, has 0 mistakes made, none. And those are boring anyways, so stop telling me about them.
That's funny, actually. That reminds me of various CIO presentations I've seen, and it took me a few years to work this out. Essentially, to present on a successful project is really good for the CV. Which is obvious, yeah.
But no one asks. No one asked for the detail of what you presented on, right?
Absolutely.
And being able to be brave enough to stand up on stage and go, "Look, it wasn't all perfect."
Right? And you're never going to call BS on a customer.
No, but we all need to, and AWS has the ability to do that, right?
Mm.
and go, look, this, like, start reaching out to your architects and go, hey, I want to know about the projects that kind of went off the rails where we ended up making the customer happy. Can we get those people to speak and say, hey, this is what went off the rails, and just dig into it? What do you wish AWS had done different? What do you wish you had done and your teams had done different? If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? Those are the kind of things that are actually valuable, that teach us things, that give us the ability to learn and be better, because we can take those lessons away, right? Otherwise, it's just another form of advertisement. I don't need another form of advertisement. I'm already at your show.
That does bring to one of my favorite bugbears, or my least favorite. Well, I'm not sure how that works with the negatives, but essentially, it's when analysts are treated as journalists. So that the whole point of the presentation is to give people things to write about, and then you'll get the person coming up to you afterwards saying, "Are you gonna publish on this?" And you're like, well, and then you got to think, well, if I say no, and I've actually had vendors say to me, well, we're not going to invite you because you didn't write anything. Yeah, you didn't write, end up publishing a blog or a research note or something.
Critical.
Yeah. So it's when it's just about someone saying something so you can write about it, then you're not going to get any of the war stories. You're literally just going to get, yeah, we deployed the data warehouse and it was great.
Yep.
And we managed to process all this data. Did you get that? Yeah, all this data. It's very boring and it's very outbound and it offers me nothing. Where it's really interesting is when it is absolutely the war stories. And then I think vendors that get analysts right, there is the unspoken gentle person's agreement with vendors about, we'll tell you things we wouldn't tell the journalists. That product was shocking. We had to ditch it. That other product we didn't get to market in time. Therefore, we did this. And the analysts are going, oh, thank you.
Right.
Now I know how to present you because I can see where you've told me your weaknesses. Therefore, I now see your strengths. If everything's perfect, I don't know. There's no differentiation. I can't say
correct.
AWS over Azure or the other way around. So I've got nothing to say. So I just say use any. Yeah.
Right. They're all pretty much the same. Just pick whatever makes sense for you. Right. And to be honest, that's actually been my like GCP, AWS, Microsoft. The rate of change is so high, I wouldn't actually spend a whole lot of time concentrating on the technology. Let's talk about how your business is formed, because it's likely that the way you operate or your operating model will align better with one of the three clouds than the others, but it doesn't. Like don't stay awake at night trying to figure it out. Right? Because the decision on which cloud is not the important decision. How, much more important. Why, much more important. What, still much more important.
Yep, and I guess the final bugbear for me is, well, there's more. It's never going to be, is don't dress this stuff up as thought leadership. It's like, don't say to everyone, you need to get to the clouds. That's thought leadership. No, it's not. That's just That's just push marketing. Pithy. Yeah.
Right. Don't be pithy and think that makes it thought leadership. Right.
So what's your perfect panel then? How would that look?
My perfect panel is one that represents the space, right? Like that panel would have been great if they put an enterprise IT leader. Like give me a CIO for a Fortune 2000, right? And make sure that person, like, have the 4 people sell to that person. That would have been a really interesting conversation. Don't because if all 4 people agree and all 4 people agreed with some minor differences, it's not even an interesting panel, right? An interesting panel is one where you have, like, give me 3 climatologists and a climate change denier, right? Give me 3 climatologists and someone who's not necessarily a climate change denier, but someone who's extremely pro-business and can talk about the impact that this stuff is going to have from a different angle, right? If all the angles are the same, then I don't actually need a panel. You could just put any one of them up there. And if none of them are good enough to carry a conversation by themselves, then they shouldn't be on the panel to begin with.
That does remind me of one occasion. I can remember almost the style of the stools. I was hosting a panel. I was standing up and 4 people were sitting on stools. And they all went around and said what they were doing and so on and so forth. And I can't remember the topic. It's irrelevant. It was to do with something to do with infrastructure as code kind of stuff. But everyone said something, and then one person said, "I'm sorry, but everything everyone has said so far has been absolute rubbish."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh God, now what do I do?" You know, it's live broadcast, everything else. But it then became a much more interesting panel,
Right.
because then people had to justify. I mean, obviously, a little bit of knowledge of that's where rehearsals can be quite good. That you kind of get a grasp of what people are going to come up with. Sometimes the best, as you know, the best webinars you have are the final rehearsal before the actual webinar.
Sure.
When you get the really good debate going, and then the webinar itself is, so you've got an interesting product. Yes, I have. But the real fun stuff was in the rehearsal, which is always a shame. But yeah,
part of the problem with over rehearsing, right? That's why I try not to. That's why
yeah,
I don't like the rehearsal.
sure.
Like the pre-webinar for me is more a tech check, and like this is the general topic of conversation. And I tell everyone, like, if you ask me the questions now, I'm not going to give you the same answer when we go live. I've got time to think about it between now and then. I'll reflect on what I said. I'll continue to read more and consume more. My answer is going to change.
And when I do get the opportunity to host or moderate or whatever, I do ask kindly questions, but ultimately they're the difficult questions, or I try to, which is, so what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome? What would you do differently next time? Those kinds of things, which at least then get people to do the safe space thing, but still, show a little bit of what was behind the kimono. So it's not all puff piece.
Yeah. The panel that I was on that I got the most feedback of anything I've ever done was at a blockchain conference, and it was a one-day blockchain conference, and they asked me to be on the panel very last minute, right? And I was like, sure, I'll be on your panel, but you're not going to get an answer from me that you're going to like. And they're like, no, we don't care. We want you on the panel. Okay. So there were 4 of us. I was the last minute addition. The other 3 kind of knew each other, and nobody knew me. And so they just started talking about how amazing blockchain is. And I went, no, everything they said is crap. And you could see the collective gasp, because we're at a blockchain conference and I'm telling you not to use blockchain. I said, there is no value in adding a complex technology to solve a problem that's already been solved with well-known, better understood technology. Instead, let's think about the strengths of blockchain and where to apply them. Start with the business case. Don't start with the technology. Every single thing they've said is starting with the technology. Right? And it was as simple as that. No, I'm not opposed to blockchain. I don't poo-poo blockchain, but I want whatever the technology choice is to match the problem and be the best fit for the problem based on everything we know at the time. Right? And so if you're just throwing blockchain at the problem or any other technology, it's going to fail. You're not going to make money. You're never going to get the ROI out. And instead, you're just complicating your already complicated environment. Right? There was some research company long ago looked at the average enterprise and determined that the average enterprise on the low end has 5,000 applications. Right? If you're not working to reduce that number, you're not helping me in any way, shape, or form. And if all you're doing is ultimately adding that and complicating that, and blockchain is not 1 application, but 50, you're not actually helping.
That number sounds very familiar. Yep. It's,
right?
It's interesting. I think that's maybe a good final point to end on, which is what you do with final points. You end on them. That's the point of the final point. And good thing about tautologies.
It's always funny to me. People say it was in the last place I looked. Well, you found it. Would you consider? Were you going to continue looking? Like, how many times did you find a thing and went, you know what? I don't want it to be the last place I looked. I'm going to continue looking.
Oh yeah.
Right. It's always in the last place you look, because hopefully you stop after you find it.
That's the most unique thing I've heard anyone ever say. So back to it. Ultimately, maybe the secret sauce of any good panel is the business case. It's if you can get it back to the business need. I literally just came off a call last week with someone saying, "What do you think of our new technology?" And I was saying, "Well, what problems it's solving?" And they went, "We don't know yet. We're still working that bit out." And I was thinking, mate, but whilst you may want to. If you want to get there, don't start from here.
At the same time, though, like think about it from the creation phase. I have this really good idea to do this thing in a way that is unique. How many times does that start with the business case rather than start with looking at a tool and going, well, this tool didn't do the thing that I think it should do, and here's a smarter way to do it, right? And I think I don't ever want to be in a position where we're like, well, the only way you can ever get funding is if you thoroughly understand the business case for this awesome thing that you developed, right? In some cases, we need to do the awesome thing. At the same time, when I look at a startup and I go, hey, is this startup going to be successful? One of the things I look for is, at what point is the founder, the creator, going to step aside and hire a professional? Right? Pure is a really good example. The CEO is not the founder. Right? The CTO is not the founder. Chief product officer, not the founder. Right? The founder's doing what the founder should be doing, and hired professionals to do the things that they're not great at.
They get the honorary title and swan around meeting customers.
Right. And mucking with things and ideating, and effectively the best founders, tech founders that I've ever seen, go on to become the head of R&D. Right? They go on to do the thing that they're truly great at. And there are obvious exceptions, right? Steve Jobs comes to mind. Right? Why? Jobs was not a tech founder. Right? He didn't build and create the tech. He was a tech visionary. There's a difference. Right? He made a fine CEO. We could argue the nuance there, but it is something I think that's worth looking at when you're looking at these companies. Right? What are the roles? At what point did they bring in someone that's a professional, and are they thinking about it? And then start with why. Do they know and understand their lives?
Panels, as conferences, as corporate strategy? Absolutely.
All the way around. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this. John and I sure had fun. We had fun ranting beforehand, and hopefully had fun discussing it on camera here. Hopefully you all did too, and will join us for the next episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Techy. I'm Howard Holton.
And I'm John Collins.
Yeah, please like, subscribe, share, comment. If you have a topic that you'd like us to discuss, if you'd like to be on the podcast and have something interesting to say, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to have you. We'd love to have your topic. If you don't like us, happy to hear that too. Love any comments that we get.
Howard.
Well, have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.